In this presentation, we're going to be talking about women of color and how they're presented in television. We'll be discussing the stereotypes of women of color and how it's presented, as well as how these representations have an effect, as well as different solutions to them.
For context, we will be focusing on three particular groups: Black women, Asian women, and Latinx women. There are obviously many more groups that deserve attention, such as trans women and other women of color, but for today's presentation, we will be focusing on those three groups in particular.
To begin our presentation, we will be discussing Black women in television. Okay, so here's a brief history of Black women in television. It's important to note that Black women have a long history in TV, but with more negative portrayals, such as mammies and women in submissive roles. I decided to touch on some more positive interpretations. So Ethel Waters made history in 1939 as the first Black woman to star in her own show. She was later on the first Black woman nominated for an Emmy. In 1968, Diane Carroll starred in Julia, which was important because it was the first show starring a Black woman in a non-servant role and in a more positive light. Today, we see some progress in the media with these representations through BET. We see Oprah as a strong and successful role model, and we have Shonda Rhimes, who is a successful Black woman in television, casting minority women and helping break these stereotypes. So contemporary media tells us a lot about Black women. Sadly, it tells us more bad things than good. Some of the good stereotypes that we see are that Black women are independent, driven, and incredibly determined. However, some of the bad stereotypes are the domestic mammy stereotype and the Jezebel stereotype, which stem from centuries of slavery and just the oppression in general of Black women. We see, on the other hand, the overly aggressive, angry Black women trope, which puts their anger as a trivial aspect of their personality and discredits their emotions.
In a 2013 study by Essence magazine, they took surveys of 901 women and over 1,200 respondents, some of whom kept visual diaries of what they saw. They reported feeling sad and disrespected at the visual representations of Black women in media. Overwhelming representation included gold diggers, modern Jezebels, baby mamas, uneducated sisters, wretched women, Black angry women, Black mean girls, unhealthy Black women, and Black Barbies. And the six stereotypes we sometimes see but need more of are young phenoms, real beauties, individualists, community heroines, girls next door, and modern matriarchs. The negative imagery of Black women is more often seen, almost twice as likely as positive imagery, and the type least seen is community heroines. Respondents of the survey said that the best representations of Black women they know in real life are the positive ones, like modern matriarchs or individualists. And some women reported that they felt that lighter skin and straighter hair portrayed on media was believed to be the most beautiful. Our second example is the book Sister Citizen by Melissa Harris Perry, in which Melissa Harris Perry uses the allegory of the crooked rim to describe how Black women conform to racial and gender stereotypes. Unable to stand up straight, they contort themselves into conformity of images that their supposed humanity is supposed to be. She speaks to the phenomena of Black women embracing, or at least willingly participating and leaning into the stereotypes presented: the mammy, the Jezebel, the angry Black woman. But like Harris Perry says, it can be hard to stand up in a crooked rim. Namely, if one is only given so many stereotypes of ways of being, how is it realistic to expect them to break the narrative if it's the only accepted one? A great example would be the first woman to win an Oscar, Hattie McDaniel, who was praised to be allowed a seat at the table but criticized for the misrepresentation she portrayed. Harris Perry goes on to say how sometimes Black women do conquer these myths, sometimes they are defeated in doing so, and sometimes it is too much to fight. No matter what, it is important to analyze the crooked rim. These myths are not to be celebrated. They shame Black women, have damaging consequences, and force Black women into crooked rims that control their public and lives and politics.
We'll be now moving on to the Asian women in television. On this slide, I have a bunch of dates that I feel like are important for Asian women in television. I feel like it's important to note that before the 1950s, there were plenty of Asian characters. However, they were often played by white women using yellowface. Also, during this time, during the 1950s and 1970s, a lot of Asian women were typecast as subservient and humble roles. There have been plenty of other shows that had Asian women characters, but many of them were side characters who were used as tokens of diversity. Also, before the 2000s, any show that had strong female leads were canceled usually after their first season. It's important to note shows like Fresh Off the Boat, Glee, and etc. have had Asian female characters, however most of them are used to fulfill age-old stereotypes. In the end, I also included some notable award winnings. However, please keep in mind that the Emmys have been around for 70 years and only one Asian woman has won one. On this slide, I have what contemporary media tells us about Asian women today, the good and the bad. In the good, even though we see them as smart, high-performing, and successful jobs and leaders of the family, this either feeds into the model minority stereotype or the tiger mom stereotype. Also, the bad feeds into such as like antisocial, struggling to form relationships. That feeds into the internally foreign thesis, which we saw in other readings in this class. I feel like it's important to note that we often don't see a well-rounded Asian character, and we often see some sort of stereotypical aspect in their development. The article Missing Romance, the author talks about how when he would watch TV, he often sees that two characters in a relationship, they were often interracial if one of them was Asian, and he could not find a relationship between two Asian characters. I believe this plays into the internally foreign thesis, as an Asian character would have to have a relationship with another race as a way of dissipating their foreignness. An example of a relationship between two Asian characters would be in Glee's Tina and Mike. While they were an Asian couple, they were only pushed into the forefront when they were talking about stereotypical issues such as intergenerational conflict or being model minorities, and then after that they were immediately pushed into the background.
In the article Gender, Race, and Media Representation, the author observes two prominent tropes for Asian women in particular. The Lotus Blossom trope consists of Asian women playing characters that are submissive who act as sexually driven love interests. They are often portrayed as being very exotic and docile individuals, usually seen as some kind of prize standing alongside men in power. The Dragon Lady trope sexualizes Asian women as well, but they are given power in a way in which they are cunning and deceitful. Valerie Vale from Gotham was a character who, as a journalist, would flirt with and deceive many people in order to get scoops for her news stories. This trope also plays into the previously mentioned Tiger Mom trope, in which the Asian woman in question is a very demanding and powerful maternal character. Mrs. Lee from Victorious is a mother with a very exaggerated accent. She is seen to be a very controlling woman, especially towards her daughter, and is very cunning.
Next, we have Latinx women in television. During the 1940s, the Latina woman stereotype gained fame in the United States. By 1945, Carmen Miranda, who was a Latina woman known for her performances wearing fruit hats, was the highest paid woman at the time. In the 1980s, Latinx television was becoming more accessible to people in the States through networks like Telemundo. More progress was made in the 1990s with the emergence of shows like The George Lopez Show. In the 2000s, Ugly Betty premiered and was the only network show to focus around a Latina woman lead. In today's media, we still have both negative and positive representations of Latinx women. Good representation of Latinx women includes the use of Spanish, the portrayal of women in a variety of careers, strong-willed characters, and cultural appreciation. Jane in Jane the Virgin is a positive representation as she uses Spanish throughout the show. She and her family demonstrate cultural aspects such as traditional foods and customs, and she's not made a sexual object as many Latinx women are. Other examples of positive representation include Miranda from Lizzie McGuire and Dora. Some bad representations of Latinx women include the hot Latina stereotype, the immigrant stereotype, excess aggressiveness, and subordination. Gloria from Modern Family adheres to the hot Latina housewife stereotype. She is portrayed as stereotypically loud and aggressive, and there are many times where Gloria is clueless to American culture, which adds to the immigrant stereotype. In the article Three Faces of Eva, Deborah Merskin identifies three main stereotypes for Latinx women. The first is the cantina girl who behaves in an alluring fashion, typically teasing and dancing. She has big hips, big lips, and a small waist, and is a physical sexual object. The next is the faithful, self-sacrificing señorita. Her role in the film is to protect her male love interest as she is powerless and naive. The last is the vamp. She uses psychological menace to manipulate men and get what she wants. These stereotypes are still persistent in today's television, and they uphold the white Hollywood hegemony. They also contribute to internalized oppression of Latinx women. One show that has been a positive representation for Latinx females is Dora. Aaron Rhyme concluded that the character of Dora gave power to Latinas through her use of both Spanish and English, Latin music, and her appearance. By having Dora speak in both English and Spanish, she is giving bilingual children the confidence to do so as well. The depiction of Dora with typical Latinx characteristics such as dark hair and dark skin gives Latinx girls a role model who looks like them.
The mainstream idea is that positive representation is the best because it doesn't associate a certain group with negative qualities. While this stands to be true, it does create stereotypes, and those stereotypes create standards in effect that allow for differences between groups and allow some groups to prosper while others do not. It's important to see women of color past their race and or ethnicity because it allows stereotypes to be lessened and it reduces socioeconomic disparities between different groups. Well-rounded representation consists of portraying both the negative and positive aspects of a marginalized group instead of focusing solely on either or. It takes racial issues into account, but the race of the characters is not their identity, nor are any of the stereotypes or tropes.
Here are discussion questions. Thank you for listening.